Hello and welcome to the GCSE music channel. This video is part of a series on rhythms of the world, and in this video we're going to take a look at samba music. So what will you learn in this video? Well, we're going to take a look at where samba music comes from, the typical musical features of samba music, and the typical instruments used. So let's start by taking a look at where samba music comes from. Samba music comes from Brazil, which is a country within the continent of South America. Samba music is very lively, often performed at carnivals and celebrations. And samba music is heavily influenced by African drumming. So if you've watched the video on African drumming, you will already know some of the musical features. However, keep watching because certain things are different in samba music, and samba music uses different instruments to African drumming. So let's take a look at the typical musical features of samba music. And first of all, samba music will use polyrhythms. That's when there are multiple rhythms being played at the same time. If you've already watched the video on African drumming, you'll know what that means. However, we will talk about that in more detail in just a moment. Samba music will use a rhythm known as the son clave. We'll talk about that in more detail in just a moment. And samba music will use features such as call and response. It will use cyclical patterns. That means the same rhythms will be repeated over and over. It will have either 2 or 4 beats per bar, and it will be led by a lead drummer. So let's take a look at some of those features in more detail, starting with the son clave rhythm. The son clave is a very important rhythm used in Latin American music such as samba. It is a short repeated rhythmic phrase that will repeat throughout the piece of music. It's usually performed on an instrument called the claves, which is 2 pieces of wood which are hit together, as you can see in the picture here on screen. Have a listen to what the son clave rhythm sounds like. The picture on screen shows what the son clave rhythm looks like when it's wrote down and notated, but you probably won't need to know that for your exam. You will need to know that it's an important feature of samba music, and you need to know what it sounds like. So now let's take a look at what a polyrhythm is. Again, if you've already watched the African drumming video, you will already understand and know what a polyrhythm is. So a polyrhythm is where there are multiple rhythms played at the same time. The word poly means many. Each individual rhythm can be quite basic, but when we combine them together, we hear all of those rhythms at the same time, it can sound much more complex. So on the screen now, you will see a rhythm grid with 5 different rhythms. Let's have a listen to what this rhythm grid sounds like played all together. The audio we're about to hear will start with just 1 rhythm, then 2, then 3, and then so on, all the way up to 5 rhythms altogether. Now let's take a look at some of the typical instruments found in samba music. We've already spoken about one instrument earlier on in the video, the claves. That's an instrument that you can identify in your exam. Here's some others. So we have the surdo, which is quite a large drum. We have the caixa, which is basically just a snare drum. If you can't remember the proper word for caixa in your exam, you can just put snare, but try and remember the correct name if you can. We also have the agogo bell. Now this was featured in African drumming. It is a piece of tuned percussion. We can play 2 separate notes on it, and it can be used to perform a really simple melody. And we have the repanike, which looks very similar to the surdo, but it is much smaller. Samba music can also have some other non-percussion instruments such as brass and vocals. A big difference between samba music and African drumming, samba music tends to have more of a melody line over the top of the percussion instruments, either through other instruments such as brass instruments performing the melody, or singers singing a melody over the top of the percussion. So who leads a samba ensemble? Well, when we looked at African drumming, the person who led the ensemble was known as the master drummer. In samba music, they are known as the lead drummer. They have very similar roles, but remember, in samba music, they are known as the lead drummer, not the master drummer. And this person will lead the ensemble. They will also normally play the repanike. They will also usually use a whistle. Now this is very important. The whistle is used because it cuts through the sound and it helps to give signals to the rest of the ensemble. In previous exams where samba music is featured, there has been a question about the use of a whistle. So remember that. It's also a distinct feature of samba music because we don't hear whistles in African drumming. The lead drummer will decide the structure of the performance, which we'll talk about in just a moment, and will lead sections such as call and response. So let's just take a quick look at the possible structure of samba music. So just like with African drumming, samba music can be very repetitive, but it will be broken down into sections to make it more interesting to listen to. So sections can include polyrhythmic sections, that's where all the different rhythms are being performed at the same time. There'll be sections where all instruments play the same rhythm together in unison. Solo sections where just one instrument or one group of instruments will play on their own, and call and response sections which will be led by the lead drummer. And again, samba music can include vocals. Now this could just be one singer or multiple singers performing together in unison. The vocals will usually be sung in Portuguese, and the vocal melody will most likely be quite simple and very repetitive. And some vocal techniques we may hear microtonal intervals and melisma, just like the other styles that we've looked at within this topic, Rhythms of the World. So now we've learned a little bit about samba music, why not pause the video here and see if you can answer the questions on screen. If you're struggling for an answer, just rewind the video and have another listen to see if you can't find it. If you found this video useful, don't forget to click the thumbs up to give it a like. If you haven't already done so, you can click the logo to subscribe, or click over here to have a look at another video. You can also use the music revision resources at www.musicgcse.co.uk.